There are a lot of books out there about leading people, but very few that provide advice on how to lead yourself. Joining me today is Elizabeth Lotardo, online instructor and author of the book Leading Yourself. Have you ever wondered how you could uplevel your career even if you're not in your dream job? Or maybe you have a difficult boss or are experiencing burnout? Together, let's uncover how you can find more joy, meaning, and opportunities in the job you already have. This is E3. Engage and empower with empathy. Welcome to the show today, Elizabeth. It's really nice to have you here. I've got your book ready, Leading Yourself, for this conversation. For those of you who are viewing this episode, I literally have earmarked, 20 or 25 pages in this book, and there's highlights and everything. So it resonated a lot with me. I think it will resonate a lot with this audience. So thanks for being here today.
I'm so glad to talk with you today and so appreciative of the invitation. The fact that you, someone who is a natural self leader, a change agent, a motivated person, found 25 pages worth dog earing is high praise.
That means a lot. I think it's a really important topic, especially with the unprecedented levels of change that people are experiencing right now and having difficulty coping with that change. And we'll talk about that in a bit. But before we do, I want to talk about how you got into this topic to begin with. So you actually start the book talking about the pandemic and kind of setting the stage with, okay, we're all forced into this self-reflection mode. I was included in that mix. I mean, we all had some time to really think about what's meaningful and important to us. And you mentioned that this gave a lot of us courage to leave abusive bosses, toxic work environments, or dead end paths, as you say. And then you go on to talk about the resignation that followed that self reflection period where everyone was like, okay, well, this is not what I want to do anymore. So I'm out of here. So was this shift that happened in 2021, 2022, is that what really drove you to work on this book and publish this book? Tell me a little bit more about the origins of this idea.
It was definitely a burning platform that led to this book. And I study organizational psychology. So the Great Resignation, this was like my Super Bowl, like real time, this mass talent event is playing out before us. And I think what prompted the Great Resignation was a long time coming, but two things happened in mass. One, we were all forced home. So we lost, in most cases, the swanky offices, all these water cooler conversations with the colleagues that we enjoy. We lost the free smoothies, like all these perks that made work kind of nice. And all that was left was the work. And parallel to that, we were experiencing a global pandemic, which forced everyone, much like an individual health crisis or an individual family crisis would, forced everyone en masse to think, what am I doing with my life? Why am I here? How am I spending my time? So these two things coming together, losing all these like things that were propping up our work experience and also having this emotional crisis gave way to the biggest talent shift we've seen in modern history, the Great Resignation. And what played out after this mass quitting of jobs was fascinating because the vast majority of people who left during the Great Resignation cited this need for meaning and purpose and impact in the reason for their departure. But they didn't find it. 2 years later, most of the respondents, there was like this thousand person survey from Harvard Business Review, openly admitted that they were better off at their old job and they left too quickly. So, as a researcher, I was perplexed because we had this universal call for better, more meaningful work experiences, but changing jobs didn't deliver it for the vast majority of people. So I set out to study even more deeply. I started in 2017, but took a new lens in 2021 during this time of what does it take to create a great work experience? Because it's clear you can't find one if the majority of people who look for one didn't. What does it take to create one from the inside? And how can we ourselves be an agent of change in transforming the way we work? And that gave way to the book Leading Yourself.
I love that. And you have You have a LinkedIn Learning course on the same topic, right?
I do. I've been toying around with this idea for some time. In 2017, I first created a LinkedIn Learning course about leading yourself with the lens of, if your boss is not awesome, how do you make this work? In 2020, I updated it as we all went remote and people had less direction, less hand holding, with the lens of how do you empower yourself to really own your role. And then the book, Leading Yourself, the third, and I don't want to say final, but latest, most all encompassing iteration, is a more holistic look of how are you effective at work, but also how do you make it a source of meaning, joy, and opportunity for you.
Got it. Would you recommend that someone take your course first and then read the book, or vice
No,
versa?
please do not look at my 2017 content. I have grown a lot as an instructor and as a writer. Leading Yourself, the book, is the most all encompassing take. It's the most emotional, it's the most personal. My LinkedIn Learning courses are a bit more tips driven, practical, more focused on the how do you, check off your to do list in a way that works for you. But if self leadership is a concept, and I would assume it is for most of your listeners, you embody, you want to get better at, the book is the best tool.
Got it. And you were really good in the book about, excuse me, about giving practical tips. So you had mentioned that your LinkedIn Learning focuses on those kind of action driven tidbits, but I think your book does that well as well. So
I'm glad to hear that. Self leadership can be a kind of navel gazy topic, right? Where we all sit around, look at our belly buttons, and contemplate the meaning of life. I wanted to give a more realistic, more relatable take to that and make it practical for a normal job in a normal company on Monday.
well, I appreciate that. It certainly resonated. Let's talk a little bit about change again, going back to this topic where everyone's just trying to figure out how to cope with the constant change and disruption that's happening in our lives, not just at work. One of my favorite quotes in your book is, leading yourself requires you to not only tolerate change, but to embrace it. Now that's easier said than done. And I can say that having led people through change, through a major restructuring in the corporate world, I saw how different individuals dealt with it. And it's not a one size fits all approach. Everyone handles change differently, and it's easier for some than it is for others. When you say embrace change, what exactly does that look like, and why should people try to embrace change?
Well, you're right. Easier said than done, even for me. And I wrote that line intellectually. It's a truth we all know that the more you resist and dig your heels in, the worse it gets for you. The challenge I face, and I think a lot of professionals face, is translating that intellectual understanding of, I know I got to sort of lean into this, I guess, into action and bringing that truth to validity instead of just this, core principle that sits over here that all humans should know. My focus on leading yourself is how do you take that truth of embracing change and actually do it instead of just understand it. One of the biggest helps for me as someone who is naturally kind of resistant to change, as most humans are, was something I learned from a woman named Tessa Romero. She taught me this practice called "This is my chance." Those 4 words shifted my mindset, arguably more than any other brain hack or mental tip that I have ever learned. How it plays out is, let's take AI, for example. I'll use a personal example. AI is disrupting my business profoundly. I don't know what this means for content creation, for original thought, for thought leadership. That is a really scary thing to recognize as someone who just came out with a book. So, how do I use this is my chance to reckon with that? This is my chance to put forth ideas in a different way. This is my chance to have my work reach maybe more people with the way these tools are summarizing content. If my core belief is that leading yourself can change the way we work, this is my chance to really live that, even if my name isn't attached to it. So, what that practice did for me was it enabled me to accept the really scary stuff about change and not try and deny it and put this like toxic positivity, it's all going to be great over it, but find the opportunity somewhere in there. This is my chance to what? Give my like crazy lizard brain a place to land.
I like that. And I know you have a natural inclination to lead yourself. For someone who may not see the immediate opportunity in change and may just get stuck in that rut of woe is me, AI is ruining my life, it's going to completely change my business in a horrible way. I've seen people get stuck in that negative mindset and can't get out. What do you recommend to people like that who don't immediately see that opportunity like you did?
I don't immediately see the opportunity. That took me a few months to come up with, just to be clear. I certainly had my days of wallowing, especially with ChatGPT and what it's done to thought leadership. For me, it came down to I'm only costing myself wallowing. My pity party is not going to change the trajectory of this. I'm only in control of how I respond. My odds of coming out on top in the new world are better if I'm not upset and angsty. That's an easy intellectual truth, but I think once you play your pity party out and realizing it's not changing anything but your own happiness is when you open the door for this is my chance to what? I gotta find something in here. I can't control what technology is doing, but I can control how I use it. Just like you can't control a reorg and what's happening, but you can control how you respond. Even if that response is, you know what, this is my chance to put my head down and brush up on my LinkedIn and make sure I don't take the stress of this to my dinner table with my family. This is my chance. You can always find something within your control. When you do, you feel more empowered, even if the situation around you doesn't change.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And thinking about the change that I've gone through myself in the last year, I also had moments like you where I thought I just lost my job. What am I going to do with my life now? Or I can't log into a Teams meeting now. You'd be surprised. When you lose your job, you just you lose that typical work routine, right? Where you're literally in meetings all day. I was so used to that. I just woke up the next day and was like, what the heck am I going to do with myself? You kind of go through that period, but once you realize it's better for you to have an internal dialogue that focuses more on opportunity rather than looking at the past and what happened to you, that's what takes you to that next level. So I like what you mentioned about that internal dialogue.
It's tough though. And one of the things I say in some of my training classes is you can do it with an eye roll. You can only partially believe it. You don't have to fully embrace this, like the reorg is going to be awesome for me and AI is endless opportunity. You can be like, okay, this is my chance, I guess, to lean into relationships. It still works, even if you only half believe it, and even if you're kind of begrudgingly forcing your brain to practice.
I love the permission to have an eye roll. I'm sure that'll help a lot of people. We're talking about self-leadership here, but we can't not talk about bosses. We talked about this in the beginning as well, and how this kind of fueled your original idea of creating that LinkedIn learning course, Leading Yourself. I actually attended a webinar last week that presented some really eye-opening stats about bosses. To me, it shows how important it is to manage that relationship as well as you can. So the stats that they showed in the webinar were 58% of people say that they trust a stranger more than they trust their boss. Yeah.
Whose webinar is this? I'm so curious.
So this was a webinar hosted by Ingenuity. They're an e-learning specialist, I believe. They also co-hosted the webinar with Bob Chapman, the CEO of Barry Waymiller.
Oh, cool.
Who drives truly human leadership in his organization. So, of course, they were talking about the human component of leadership naturally.
That is bananas.
So, yeah, that's great. And then 65% of employees would rather see their boss fired than get a pay raise. So those were the two stats that came up on the screen. And I took a screenshot and actually posted something on LinkedIn because I had the same reaction as you. My jaw was on the desk. This is why we need leadership development. This is why we need supervisors and people managers to be equipped with the tools to effectively lead people, because clearly this is an
Yeah,
issue.
that's not neutral. That's very negative to want to see your boss get fired versus pay raise.
It's horrible. How can we address this through self leadership? Now, I actually liked that you talked about servant leadership in this book, because I've read books on this methodology. I get what the authors are trying to say with servitude, but it still kind of rubs me the wrong way to think of the
Same.
servant, a leader as a servant. And you,
Poorly branded, in my opinion, the philosophy.
yeah, it just doesn't sound right. I think clearly you mentioned this as well in your book. Let's talk about that a little bit more. Why a leader isn't necessarily a servant per se, and what you can do as a direct report to manage that relationship.
It's all connected to the stats you mentioned. And wanting your boss to be fired instead of get a pay raise is sad, but a lot of times it's not without cause. Leaders have treated historically employees poorly. And even if you are not treating your employee poorly, this track record of bad leadership has put a narrative in the mind of most frontline employees to the data that my leader's out to get me, they don't support me, they don't care. Even if that's not you, that's fueled from the way someone's parents talked about their boss, from the boss they worked for when they first got out of college, right? People don't come to you as a clean slate. A lot of us are carrying this belief that the boss is bad and someone to be fearful of and dislike. And that's harmful to everyone, to the individual. It's also harmful to a frontline leader who might not be perfect, but is well intended. How do we reckon with this notion of self leadership and your boss, and where does servant leadership come into that? Let's tackle servant leadership first, because that dynamic, the icky part of that, is, I think, part of what's fueling this challenging relationship. So, servant leadership is a concept, if you're not familiar, where instead of the employee serving the boss, as it has traditionally been talked about in command and control leadership in the 70s, 80s, 90s, even early 2000s, the suggestion of servant leadership is that you flip it and that the boss is the servant to the employee. I have issue with this because high performing, empowered individuals don't want a servant, right? That just feels weird. You don't want your boss to be your servant. You want them to support your professional development and to champion you and to get you the resources you need, but you don't want them to be your servant. And you don't want to be their servant either. You have free will and ideas. It's just such a disempowering term. To apply it to either side of the relationship is just eroding to the human spirit. I think the reason that servant leadership took off is because we were so sick of the opposite, this command and control style leadership. So the pendulum swung, in my opinion, a little too far in the other direction. What we know now and what the research tells us is that the most effective boss employee relationships are purpose driven, where neither party is the servant of the other. They're working together towards this common goal. And that's empowering to both the leader because they have potentially more resources, more sway. It's also empowering to the employee because instead of their happiness and needs being the metric, we're actually doing something here. If you're sitting here thinking, okay, that makes sense, but my boss is kind of meh, I'm one of those people who would really prefer them be fired than get a raise. How do you bring this essence of leading yourself and purpose-driven leadership to improve the relationship with your boss instead of falling into one of these extremes, command and control or servant leadership? Anyone, the boss or the employee, can calibrate to a shared purpose. It doesn't have to be the CEO, it doesn't have to be the boss at all. Purpose doesn't have to be some like fluffy statement. It is on you, an individual, if you're not getting it from your boss, to make sure you are aligned in the pursuit of a goal and that the purpose is at the center and you are both working towards that. because the purpose gives the anxious, want to do something, want to make everybody happy energy a place to land. If you are only focused on pleasing your boss, you're going to start to hate them because pleasing is never done.
Mhm.
If your boss is solely focused on pleasing you, they're going to start to hate you because it's eventually going to be pouring from an empty cup and you're going to feel weird that you're not happy, but they're trying all these things. It's just a gross dynamic. When we lean into our natural human desire to make a difference and we sync up on some type of purpose, whether it's a project, whether it's a company purpose, something, we give both sides the power and the permission to step into their full self instead of dancing this weird servant dance.
Yeah, I love what you're saying about having purpose at the epicenter there. What if your boss just isn't connected to that purpose and you feel like you're kind of driving in that direction, but they're really not centered there? How can you kind of manage upwards to help kind of guide them in that direction?
First, recognize that they don't have to be, right? Meet them where they are. Put the pop up windows in their mind of, do you have this project? Do you have the forecast? Whatever it is, answer their questions. Make sure they feel confident in you. Only then can they move into a place of maybe accepting this notion of purpose. As an individual, when you're leading yourself, you can trickle that in small ways to your boss or to any of your peers, even to yourself, by talking about customers, even when you're not customer facing, by talking about the impact that your work has, by talking about the goals on the horizon. The more you are able to point people, yourself, your peers, your boss, in the pursuit of something, the less inward angst we all feel. Our energy, our desire to do something has a place to land instead of focusing on pleasing or displeasing each other.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think there must be a point where eventually, despite all your efforts, if it's still not working, maybe your opportunity is to start updating your resume and looking for opportunities elsewhere. At what point do you get to that stage where it's just you've done what you can, you've made an effort, but you're still in this really toxic relationship, so maybe it is time to just look for another opportunity?
There's a lot of nuance there, and I try to get into it a little bit in the book. I have this chart of like what is considered annoying behavior, what is considered garbage behavior, and what is actually abusive in terms of how your boss treats you. I think some general guidelines would be to recognize that this is an imperfect person. They are probably not going to be an inspirational leader all the time. They have their own boss they're trying to please. They have too much to do. So check your expectations before we start, throwing demands. The other two variables to pay attention to are time and intensity. If this person is just kind of meh, that's workable for you. You're not going to work for an inspirational boss in every job. If this person is truly toxic, that high level of intensity of bad, that's something to pay attention to. If someone is not their best self for a quarter, even a year in a long working relationship, that's okay. We all go through seasons. They may be in a tough one. If someone is a proven jerk to everyone forever, and that's all they've ever been, that's something to pay attention to. So again, there's lots of nuance and lots of variables, but to me, time and intensity are the two big lenses with the recognition of this person is never going to be perfect, just like we'll never be perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, we all go through seasons as you say. So it is important to make that assessment. And I've seen people struggle with burnout and self-destruction as well. So you kind of have to find that fine balance between how much am I miserable because of my own doing versus, how much is my boss really the cause of that. So that's where self-leadership comes in, right?
Definitely. Again, I'm hardly an expert in this. And I wrote in the book about how bad I was at self leadership in my first job and how much I thought my boss should be this person who inspired me and my company should be this person, this entity with endless opportunities. I sucked at this for a really long time. But as I got better and I deepened my studies, I went back to school, I started researching for LinkedIn, and all of these things led me to the acceptance of, and I know you read Mel Robbins' Let Them theory. This is kind of related to that. Like, people are malleable, yet we are only in control of our own response. And if you let some leader who's a jerk monopolize your dinner time conversation, ruin your mood all weekend, make you come to work with a terrible attitude, that's on you at a certain point. The acceptance of that harsh truth is sad, but also empowering in a way, because you recognize that you are giving people authority and permission and time that they didn't ask for and don't deserve. And you have the ability to change that.
Yeah. And I love that you brought up the let them theory, because I actually have on my to-do list on my whiteboard right in front of me to eventually create a book remix. So I do these little podcast remixes where I just do 10 minutes and I basically combine the collective wisdom of two authors. And I have on my to-do list to combine the wisdom of your book, Leading Yourself, and Mel Robbins' Let Them Theory, because I saw so many synergies between what she was saying with Let
That's like
Them.
the highest of praises. It makes me feel awkward to be on a whiteboard next to her, but I will accept the compliment.
I mean, you just said it yourself without me even introducing the topic. There is so much linked to let people be themselves and let you do what you need to do to bring your own joy, bring your own happiness with whatever your life situation is in the moment. So there's a lot of connection there.
Well, I look forward to a mashup. What a collab.
Cool. Just to wrap up the dialogue, or for someone struggling out there and really in a rut, what would your tip be to just the first step they could take to try to dig themselves out of that hole that they're in right now?
If you feel that way, you're not alone. And I know that doesn't help, but it should at least provide a little bit of solace. There was some Glassdoor data that came out this year that said 2 in 3 people feel stuck in their job. They're not happy, but the economy is bad and the market is weird. So they're not going to leave. We just kind of feel bleh. So if you're in that spot, I'm sorry, you're not alone, and it's within your power to change it. The dedication of my book is to my son, and I said, you're never powerless. And that is a core belief of mine and something I have to remind myself of all the time when I get all blamey and victimy on me. Recognizing you are never powerless, and to approach a conversation with your boss, to approach your entire work experience, to approach your career in that way changes everything. It doesn't mean you're going to 180 a bad situation overnight, but it gives you permission to identify and zoom in on the levers you can control. Maybe you can't control this terrible meeting that you have to have every Monday, but you can bring yourself a fizzy drink so you at least feel a little better during the process. Maybe you can't control how tough AI is impacting you, but you can make sure that you're upskilling yourself, and that is within your control. So to look at this situation that is making you feel angsty and upset and zoom in on, okay, I'm not powerless. What in this can I do? Even if it's only a really small piece, even if it's only controlling my mindset and the story I tell myself about it. That is where progress starts to really take hold. And again, to suggest that like you can read my book in 180 a terrible work experience. No, you can't. That's a ridiculous promise. But you can make a kind of sucky one better over time. That has a major impact on how you feel and how you live your life.
So that's great advice. For those of you struggling out there, there is hope. You do have power. Look for the things that you have control over. That's a great message. And I'll bring it up on the screen one more time for those of you watching. Leading Yourself, Elizabeth Lotardo. This is a wonderful book. A lot of great action-oriented tips as well within each chapter. It certainly helped me kind of open my eyes to different perspective in the way I lead myself moving forward. So thank you for sharing your wisdom with the world in this book, and thanks for joining us today, Elizabeth.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks to everyone listening. Well, power is in our hands, right?
Absolutely. Here's to that. This podcast is designed to help busy business leaders create an inspired and engaged workforce. I am building a community of like-minded leaders and experts who all share the same passion, taking care of people at work. Whether you are a blue-collar worker, white-collar worker, small business owner, or corporate executive, you belong in this community. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts. If you know someone who I should interview or should be part of this community, please connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram. Life is too short. Let's take care of each other at work so that together we can make this world a better place.